The civil rights movement in the United States in the 1950s and 60s gave birth to a new type of power, black power. This new power did not just ask for the rights and justices of black people, but demanded it. The Black Panthers were known and feared by the government and secret services alike. Canadians took the roles of silent observers, or so it seemed. The Black Power movement was becoming more prominent in Canada and the small province of Nova Scotia. Behind it at the forefront of the scene were a man and woman who would soon be considered one of the most feared black couples in Canada.
We weren't planning any violence. All we ever talked about was our rights and gaining the same rights as everyone else had. Now, maybe they didn't like the way we talked about it, but we did, because sometimes we could get very demanding. But that's all we talked about, and I guess that was worthy of being watched.
The biggest time for change for us, the biggest, for me, I think, would have been the 60s and the 70s, because that really would have been when the Black United Front was established, Black Educators Association was going, or getting established, when you had people really stand up and start looking and seeing. And part of that was because Rocky Jones brought the Black Panthers here in '68 and scared the hell out of the rest of the country.
The world knows my father is Rocky Jones, and they see him through that lens. And I think I was quite a bit older before I saw him as Rocky Jones. He was just Dad. He was the one who couldn't punish us. He couldn't discipline us for anything. If we got in trouble, we always wanted him to handle it, because he couldn't. When I think of my parents and I hear the stories of the things that they did back in that time, my mother would tell stories to me about, the kids would all hang out and watch a house, and they'd be there and all hours of the day and night. But you can be guaranteed anybody that slept over, that had school the next morning, I don't care what time you went to bed, you were getting up, getting out of my house, and you were going to school. And there are adults today that will say to my mom, "Geez, Joan, I'm awful glad you made us go to school."
I was born in Boston, brought up in Ontario. My father worked on the railroad as a porter. My mother was a stay-at-home mom. My parents sending me to New York, in Harlem, or in Roxbury, I think that that was part of their way of educating me and making me feel comfortable, because when I was spending summers in Harlem, I wouldn't see a white face from one end of the summer to the next. I met him at his sister's wedding. I thought he was a bit arrogant. And I had reason to think that. I just thought he was a little different, a little unusual, fun.
Burnley Rocky Jones was born and raised in Truro, Nova Scotia, and moved to Toronto as a young man. He was introduced to the Black Panther Party during the 1960s. He and his former wife, Joan Jones, met prominent members Stokely Carmichael and his wife Miriam at a writers' conference in Montreal. The couples had a lot in common. Rocky and Stokely shared a common political agenda, and both were activists in a movement to improve conditions for people of African descent in North America. The two couples became fast friends and spent plenty of time together in the years to come. Stokely became honorary Prime Minister of the Black Panther Party, and Rocky would become one of the most well-known leaders of the civil rights movement in Canada.
And that's how we got connected to the Panthers. We brought them home with us, and the city went crazy because he had a reputation. A motorcycle cop came to the door and said, "Would you like police protection?" We're thinking, well, you've got to be out there all night. I guess so. Motorcycle cops don't patrol all night. So they patrolled around the block all night. But I think that was a reflection of how the white people in the city, some of them, felt about us and our guests. That's when Stokely and Miriam came. I think somehow they thought we were a threat.
Their political agenda was primarily to improve conditions for blacks in the areas of employment, education, and housing. These were fundamental human rights that were automatically granted to Nova Scotians of European descent, but certainly not for people of African descent. Since first arriving in the 1770s as black loyalist slaves, Jamaican Maroons, and later as refugees after the War of 1812, some members of these groups remained in the province, while others left due to the hardships and brutal racism they faced in Nova Scotia. There's a long and rich history of people of African descent in the province of Nova Scotia, who are now simply referred to as African Nova Scotians. Upon arrival, blacks settled in communities on the peripherals of villages, towns, and cities. Over the years, more than 50 tight-knit black communities formed and survived in the outskirts, many without the amenities such as schools, hospitals, and other essential services afforded to most white communities. Living on the fringe wasn't a choice, it was the law. Today, people of African descent continue to live in the peripherals of society. Some would say that not a lot has changed since the arrival of those very first groups to immigrate to the Promised Land beginning in the 1700s. Today, there continues to be major struggles and discrepancies in the areas of employment, education, housing, and civil rights. Rocky and Joan were committed and instrumental in the movement to create change and improve conditions for blacks in the province.
There was a sit-in at the American consulate in Toronto. And that's when he first started, maybe a light bulb went off or something, I don't know. They were doing a demonstration, and they were doing it in support of Selma. And I think he kind of looked at the group and saw there were no blacks there. The demonstration was in support of people that were being oppressed. So that made him think of the oppression that was going on in Nova Scotia. And so that's when he got kind of turned on. It was almost like an ultimatum, and I was young and very silly. And it's, I'm going to Nova Scotia. I want to go back to Nova Scotia, and you can come or you can stay. And that was kind of it. Like, he really had the I am going to change the world bug by then. And so I decided to come along with him. And besides, any Nova Scotians that I had met in Toronto made Nova Scotia sound like the Garden of Eden.
There was, however, a cost to their activism. While standing up for his own civil rights and the rights of others, Rocky became a threat to the white establishment. The woman who stood beside him, Joan, became his partner in crime, so to speak. Although they committed no crime. To the contrary, they worked diligently and tirelessly to improve the lives of their people.
Sometimes people are in a situation and they don't think about it because that's the way it is. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's the way it is. That's the way it's always been. And when you start pointing out the contradictions, then people start questioning and thinking and discussing and realizing that they can be catalysts for change. You know, you start talking about issues. You start talking about education, employment, housing, and you get people to relate it to their situations. And then it just grows and grows. And people agree that something needs to be done. They don't necessarily know what can be done, but they agree that something has to be done. The idea of Kwacha House came from the fact that our living room and kitchen just couldn't hold everybody.
Kwacha House was established in 1967 and became a place where ideas were born and developed. The vast majority of its attendees were black, but the space was open to all who shared a similar agenda of equality and the advancement of blacks in Nova Scotia. Initiatives like the Kwacha House, the Black United Front, and the Nova Scotia Project were created to foster the advancement of people of African descent in Nova Scotia in the areas of economics, education, housing, and employment. Ironically, Rocky suffered as a result of being the voice of the cause. It became increasingly difficult for him to gain employment over the years. His name became synonymous with radicalism, and he was overlooked for many employment opportunities that he was more than qualified for. It was one of the first times that a person of African descent openly and unapologetically demanded the rights of blacks in the province be delivered.
The people you met, the things you did, the issues you were involved with, that was all very exciting. Tell you what wasn't exciting is a bit of the aftermath of the main excitement was, people are afraid of us. And that's when the hurtful stuff comes in. That's when it really starts to hurt, is you've not really harmed anybody. You've hoped that you've made life for some a little better, a little easier, a little more accessible, and you can't get a job.
Rocky and Joan became the target of surveillance agencies such as the Halifax Police Department, RCMP, and even CSIS. The residential phone was tapped, and police sat outside their home, their only crime being the fight for equality.
Conditions and subversive activities, Blacks Nova Scotia. And I remember the one comment always stuck out. I think it was Lincolnville or Guysborough, one of those communities, where the comment that the person writing it had said was, and this would have been an RCMP guy probably writing it in a report, the men are hard workers, but they drink. The children are happy but dirty, and the women are prolific childbearers. I can never, ever remember being afraid. The interesting thing is now when I think back or I read back on some of those instances, I get a chill. I have a different reaction than I had then. Because what we were doing then we considered normal and our right to do. So there wasn't fear. I can say without hesitation, there was no fear.
It's very, very interesting that it's not until I was an adult that I knew how much had been happening around us kids growing up. They kept us so sheltered from the scary stuff. When you have people that hate you because of the color of your skin, when you have people out there that hate you because you're trying to make change, and there's people out there that hate you because Black folks in the community might improve their lots in life, as a parent, your fear is, who would harm my child?
But we would get threatening calls, so we would have two humongous Black guys walk her to school and go and get her, just because we were getting threats. I remember specifically one threat came from Sackville. Now, I don't know whether that was Sackville, New Brunswick, or our Sackville, and they said they were part of the Klan. Now, whether they were, I don't know. I had no way of proving that. But I remember that, so that's when we decided that she needed extra security going to school.
Tracy's raising was not typical of every young Black girl in Nova Scotia. She was one of the fortunate ones to have had an African-centered upbringing. Strong Black communities were established in Nova Scotia, but access to cultural artifacts like dolls and books were not readily available. Many did not grow up seeing Black as being beautiful.
I can remember as a child some little poem I used to recite about being Black and proud. I can remember that everything around me represented me. The dolls that I played with were all Black. And as my mom would tell me years later in life, how hard it was to collect these dolls, the ornaments, the pictures on the walls. All of that, although they weren't saying to us every single day, you are a beautiful Black woman, you are a beautiful Black man, you are a beautiful Black child, all of what they surrounded us with celebrated and acknowledged the beauty of being a person of African descent. I would think about things that bothered me, like, Why was I the only kid in elementary school forced to wear an afro and all the other kids didn't? You know, I never had processed hair, chemical hair, until I was older. Even just having the hot comb go through my hair was a treat. Dad didn't believe in those things. Mom didn't support those things. You know, you wore your hair natural. So you did. Why was I the only little girl that wore pants to school when little girls were supposed to go to school in dresses? Because my parents believed that girls should be able to dress any way that they wanted to. So off I trudged, wearing pants to school, some days throwing a dress over top so that I could at least in some way look like the other kids. I did not know the value or the significance of these things. All I knew was, y'all are impacting my life. I'm different, and you're making me different. As a Black woman, I say all the time, when I walk into a room, you see a Black woman. You don't see a woman walking into the room and ignore my race. You see a Black woman. So I carry that, and I carry that proudly. And I stand on that because I stand on the shoulders of great Black women. My mother, my mother's mother, my father's mother, and the mothers that have come before them. I stand on their shoulders. They have taught me what it takes to raise a Black man. They've taught me, what it takes to hold a community together.
Needless to say, the role of Black women in the community was paramount. Joan fought at the center of an instrumental fight and demonstrated a quiet leadership much like other Black women in the community and throughout the movement.
I think the role of women has always been strong, and some of the strongest voices in the African Canadian community. And I think they always will be.
When I look at what my parents were doing that I wish we were doing now, there was that community ownership, whether it was education, community itself, the playgrounds, the housing, the care for the seniors. Those were all things that my mom and dad cared about and got involved in. They were instrumental in creating the Black United Front. They were instrumental in the Black Cultural Society. They were just instrumental. The Black Business Initiative. Things that exist today, my parents, believe it or not, had some hand in. Whether good, bad, or not, they were part of a discussion that allowed this to happen.
The same things we were talking about then, we can talk about now, and they still mean things. It makes me sad, because sometimes I just think we wasted our time. If you work real hard, and there's certainly lots of people out there working now towards these same things, and you don't see significant changes, you have to doubt yourself. Did I work hard enough, or are the walls that are up, are they just too hard to penetrate?
When those two were involved, they had the young people at their feet being leaders. And my dad once said, I am tired of leading. It's time for the next generation to step up.
The ultimate goal of people like myself is to back out slowly so that others can come up. You become stale and sometimes even irrelevant if the same people stay. You should be training others to take over, but you need to back off and let others come forward. You may not even agree with how they're coming forward, but you can't do it for the rest of your life, or you shouldn't.
I think that it saddened him to see that they had fought for so long to see such slow progress. I'm not sure if I would say he was hurt. I would say he was tired, and that he was hoping that others were going to step up and take the torch and continue to carry it instead of continuing to look back to him to carry it for them.
When Joan passed away in April 2019, the New York Times called her a crusader for racial justice and equality in Nova Scotia. The community remembers her as the power behind the movement and the glue that held everything together. Many things changed for African Nova Scotians in the next year and a half, from the formal apology by the police for racial profiling, followed by more profiling, and even more profiling, to thousands on the streets in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement, and formation of the committee to create a proposal to defund the police. The seeds that Rocky and Joan planted with their work are now bearing fruit. Young leaders are stepping up, empowered by their example and finally supported by the global community.
Black folks are looking at each other and saying, enough is enough. We don't need somebody to lead us in a march down the street. Together, we will lead this march down the street. In Halifax, the community swelled up and said, we want our voices heard. In solidarity with our brothers and sisters south of the imaginary border, we are saying Black Lives Matter. But I think what impresses me the most is the youth mobilization. When I look at young, vibrant, beautiful Black men and women coming up, who are standing on the steps of the police station, who are marching down major thoroughfares in Halifax, when I see them, I see my parents.
I'm able to exist and be a confident and proud Black man because of the things that Rocky and Joan have done, because of the programs and the advocacy and the hard work and literal blood, sweat, and tears that they've put in. I wouldn't be able to confidently walk into a room and be Black and be proud if it wasn't for the work that Rocky and Joan did. All of these things that Rocky and Joan did made it safer and better for Black people in Halifax and in Canada even.
To lead in that way, to advocate in so many different fields, you know, the impact is, the easiest way to say is monumental, right? It's prolific. It's an opportunity because it sets the bar and it sets the standard for everyone else to come after. The opportunity to create access, reducing barriers to access and streamlining persons that maybe don't have the strong voice or are not sure of what their value is.
The work of Rocky and Jones just resonates with you, and when you're kind of in doubt that it doesn't matter, there's always this little voice that's always like it matters, and you want to continuously keep doing better. And I hope that someone says my name the way that they speak of their names. But for Rocky, there would be no Indigenous Black Mi'kmaq initiative, but for Rocky's motivation, and there would be no Rocky without Joan. And so I think we need to start thinking and giving credit to the women behind the scenes. I think it's really fundamental. And so I would, thank Rocky, but then I would go give Joan a big hug and say thank you for leading the way for us Black women to be okay in the skin that we're in and do the work that we do.
I've known Joan my entire life. She knew me since I was born. And I guess you can say that Joan Jones was one of those women in the community that was a fixture. What she really grew was the community. She gave birth to it. I want her to know that she did not do any of her work in vain, even if it never surfaced in the same way that Rocky's work did. we know, and we will carry it on as Black women. We'll make sure that our voices are heard. We have their legacy to stand on in a way that we don't have to start from scratch. We can build on some of the work that they have done.
I am Rocky and Joan.
I am Rocky and Joan.
I am Rocky and Joan.
I am Rocky Joan.
Hey,